Welcome to this invited lecture. It is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Jeff Ely. Professor Ely is the Charles E. and Emma H. Morrison Professor of Economics at Northwestern University. Professor Ely's research interests range from pure game theory to applied microeconomics to behavioral and experimental economics. Professor Ely has made important contributions to the foundations of game theory under incomplete information, repeated games, and mechanism design. He tackles deep and thought-provoking questions with elegant economic models. Professor Ely is a fellow of the Econometric Society. He was a founding co-editor of Theoretical Economics, an open access journal, now a journal of the Econometric Society. Professor Ely is also the co-author of a popular blog, Cheap Talk. I often recommend his blog to my students and friends so that they could see that economics research is not always boring. Finally, I would like to mention a minor observation. Professor Ely's papers often have an eye-catching title, from Bad Reputation to Beeps to the title of today's talk, Moving the Goalposts. These enticing titles make us want to find out what the paper is about. So without further ado, let's welcome Professor Ely.
Thank you very much. This is joint work with Martin Sadowski, who is sitting right there. So this is an ongoing project, and many of you have seen one of us present parts of this before. I want to present some new stuff, actually pretty recent. And so the goal of the talk is to start out by very quickly getting you up to speed on what we've already done, just enough to use that to springboard into the new stuff that we've been doing. So this is about dynamic information disclosure, or dynamic information design, in a setting of moral hazard. Okay, so let me describe the setting and then give you a few ideas of context where the setting would be appropriate. So there's an agent who's working for a principal. The agent wants to complete a task, and when he does, he'll earn a reward. Only the principal knows how much effort, and that means how long a spell of effort is required to complete the task. And all the while the agent is working for the principal keeps the output that the agent produces and provides information to the agent about his progress towards completing the task. Okay? So the principal likes to have the agent working for him because he keeps this output. Okay? But the only incentive device that the principal has to motivate the agent for continuing to work is the information that he can disclose to the agent about his progress. Okay? The agent only wants to work for the principal if he knows that eventually he'll complete the task. Only the principal can tell him when that's so, and so the agent relies on the principal for that information, and that's the nature of their relationship. Okay, so you can think about a worker and a mid-level manager. The point of this example is that the mid-level manager is not setting the material compensation of the agent. That's set by the larger organization. Okay, so in our model, the agent, when he completes the task, which you can think of in this context as earning a promotion, okay, he earns a reward that's outside of the control of the principal. Okay, so the principal takes as given the fact that the agent will earn this reward, and the only role that the principal has is providing feedback towards this goal of achieving a promotion. Okay, you can think about an apprentice who's working under an expert. So while he's during this apprenticeship, the expert earns the output that the apprentice produces, but eventually the apprentice wants to be an expert himself, and the principal gives him information about his progress. Okay, once he leaves the expert and goes out on his own and tries to earn a wage as an expert himself, he will be successful only if he worked long enough in his traineeship to become an expert himself. Related example, PhD student advisor. But the example I want to spend most of the time today talking about is parenting. So the agent is a child, the principal is the parent. Okay? The reward is like the feeling of accomplishment when the child has succeeded at a task. And the parent is providing feedback to the child about the child's progress. And the key feature of this example, and the thing that I'm going to highlight today, is we're going to look at a situation where the principal has a different discount factor than the agent. In particular, the parent is more patient than the agent. And the parent is, because the parent is more patient than the parent wants the agent to work longer, the child to work longer than the child otherwise would. And we're going to see how the use of this information disclosure can achieve that. Okay, so here are the main ideas behind the design of sequential information disclosures in this kind of relationship. So it's never optimal to provide fully informative feedback. Okay? I'm going to describe one of the main ideas, leading the agent on. So the principal wants to keep the agent in the dark as long as possible about the agent's progress and break the bad news to the agent that the task is actually a lot more difficult than the agent might have thought, only later on and never too early. Okay? Indeed, there's a point in time where there's a reversal of incentives for the principal, that the principal wants to be encouraging to the agent, telling the agent that this task is not going to be too hard for you, you should start working at the beginning. But then after some time, if actually the principal knows that the task is indeed difficult, then the principal will break the bad news to the agent and make the agent think that the task is more difficult. Okay, so early on making the agent optimistic in order to get the agent to start working. Later on trying to make the agent pessimistic in order to make the agent think that she has to keep on working. Okay, and that's the source of the title. Okay, moving the goalpost is this idea that the task becomes more and more difficult over time, or the principal makes it look as if the task is more and more difficult over time in order to try to get the agent to keep working longer than the agent would without these disclosures. Okay? In this dynamic information design setting, information as an incentive device takes on a new role. Okay? Normally in the information design setting, information as an incentive device is there to guide the action of an agent. Okay? The principal knows something that's payoff relevant to the agent. The principal is going to disclose information to the agent in order to change the agent's decision and in a way that aligns with the principal's goals. In this setting of dynamic information design, information is valuable to the agent, and therefore the timing of that of information disclosures is going to be a key element of the design. In particular, holding out disclosures until later is like holding out a reward, an additional reward beyond the material reward that the agent gets from completing the task, that the principal can use to try to motivate the agent. The principal says, work for me for a while and later on I'll give you this valuable information. Okay, so the structure of the disclosures will take into account the first role, that is guiding the agent's decision, as well as the second role, that is holding out those disclosures for the right time in order to act as a second incentive device. And the thing I'm going to focus on today is the value of uncertainty. So in all of these, in this model, the key reason that information disclosure is valuable as an incentive device is that the agent begins with some uncertainty about how difficult the task is. Okay? Now, we can ask the question of whether the principal actually likes that uncertainty in the first place. Okay? He certainly makes the most use of it, given that it's there, by designing his disclosures in the right way. Okay? But there's still a question of what form of uncertainty would the principal like to have in the first place? And is uncertainty even beneficial to the principal at all? And the thing I'm going to talk about today is the form of the uncertainty that the principal would like to structure in order to maximize the value of this relationship for the principal. Okay, so a little bit more formally. So the model operates in continuous time. The agent's decision at each moment in time is whether to continue working or to quit. Okay? So there's no intensive margin of effort. It's just how long to work. And there's a random variable x which determines how much effort is required to complete a task. When the agent has completed the task, if he does, he's going to earn a reward r. Okay? And all the while that he's working, he's going to incur a flow cost of c. Okay? The agent starts with a prior belief, this is the uncertainty I was talking about, f, about the random variable x. And therefore, if the agent quits at a time tau, then with probability f of tau, he will have completed the task. And at that point in time, he'll earn the reward, and he will have incurred this cumulative effort cost. Okay? So notice that the agent earns the reward only when he quits. Okay? So the PhD student is writing a thesis, and her advisor is telling her along the way whether it's yet a legitimate PhD thesis, and the advisor needn't necessarily tell the truth. Okay, but at some point in time, based on this feedback, the PhD student goes on the market, okay, and at that point in time discovers whether, in fact, the thesis is good enough to earn the reward or not. Okay, but by that time, it's too late. Okay, by that time, the relationship is over. So the role in this relationship for the principal is that he knows the threshold x. Okay. And he's going to design a policy of disclosing information about x over time. Okay? The principal just cares about output. Okay? So we're going to normalize the principal's value of the output of the agent to 1. Okay? And this is the accumulated output that the principal has earned if the agent quits at time tau. Okay? And we will consider the possibility that the principal's discount rate is smaller than the agent's. Okay? So that the principal might be more patient than the agent. All right, so an information policy is a strategy that the principal uses for disclosing messages at each point in time, possibly randomly, in ways that are possibly correlated with the private information that the principal has, namely how difficult the task is, okay? And possibly as a function of everything that's happened previously, including messages that were sent before, and how long the agent's been working, etc. Okay? So the principal designs such a policy and commits to it, and we want to analyze what is the optimal policy. Okay? When the principal commits to the policy, and this policy is some random message policy as a function of the principal's private information, that means that when the agent sees a message that comes out of that policy, he knows the random law that generated that message. He knows its correlation with the underlying variable that he cares about, x. Okay? And so he interprets that message as information about x. Okay? And for the most part, I'll just talk about direct mechanisms where the principal just tells the agent what the agent's beliefs about x should be. Okay? There are constraints on that such a policy must satisfy, and I'll talk about those, but it's simplest to think in those terms, where the principal's messages are just of the form, you should believe that the probability that the task is of difficulty x is y, etc. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking about a binary example. Okay? And I'm going to use this example to springboard into talking about the new stuff. So in this binary example, the threshold has only two possible values. So there's an easy task, x lower bar, and a difficult task. Okay, and the agent starts with a prior belief mu that the task is difficult. An important role is going to be played by the duration tau bar, which is the maximum individually rational effort for the agent. Okay, so tau bar satisfies this equation, which says that working that long and incurring the associated effort costs. Oh, there should be a C there. I'm sorry, there's a C missing here. And then earning the reward with probability 1 would give the agent a payoff of 0. And by the way, the 0 is the payoff the agent would get if he quit at the beginning. Okay? And so this says that the agent would never work longer than tau upper bar. Okay? Because he can't get the reward with a probability greater than 1. And if he gets the reward with probability greater than 1 at that date, that's just enough incentive to get him to work that long. He would never be willing to work any longer than that. Okay? So in this example, I want to look at the case where the difficult task is truly difficult in that it requires more effort than even the maximal individually rational effort. Okay? But that's not true of the easy task. Okay? However, the incremental effort required to complete the difficult task, if the agent has already worked as long as x lower bar, that incremental effort is individually rational. Okay? And it's this pairing that's going to generate this incentive reversal that I was talking about before. Okay? If the principal could somehow get the agent to work that long, at that point he wants to tell the agent that actually the task is difficult. But of course, if he told the agent at the beginning that the task is difficult, because that difficult task is not individually rational, the agent would never have started working at the beginning. All right, so I want to just very briefly summarize what we know about this example. Okay? So in this example, it is possible to get the agent to complete the difficult task. Indeed, it's possible to get the agent to complete the difficult task with probability at least mu. Remember, mu is the probability that the task is difficult. Okay? And that's done with a policy of delayed disclosure. Okay? So think about the principal saying to the agent, I know the difficulty of the task, your belief is mu. I want you to work until x lower bar, and at that time I'm going to tell you how difficult the task is. Okay? I'm going to tell you whether the task is easy or the task is difficult. Okay? So that's what we mean by delayed disclosure. And that disclosure is valuable to the agent because of this second bullet point. It tells the agent what to do. Okay? If he finds out the task is easy at the time he reaches x lower bar, he'll quit. If he finds out the task is difficult, he'll keep working. Okay? And the value of that information can be used to incentivize the agent to start working in the first place, okay, and to work until x lower bar, and eventually work until x upper bar if the task actually turns out to be difficult, even though the agent never would have set out to start working if he knew that he was going to work all the way to x upper bar. Okay? So this is what we mean by leading the agent on. Okay? It makes use of the fact that the sunk costs associated with getting to x lower bar are sunk by the time that the agent has gotten there. And by the time he's gotten there and he hears the bad news that the task is actually difficult, then it's in his interest to keep working. Okay? The principal could never get the agent to complete the difficult task if he disclosed the information at the beginning. Okay? And so delayed disclosure plays a key role. Now, the maximal incentive, the most valuable carrot the principal could use to try to get the agent to start working is full disclosure. Okay? At time x lower bar, the principal tells the agent exactly how difficult the task is. Okay? In that case, the agent would complete the task with probability 1, okay? And he would never work any longer than necessary. If he finds out the task is easy at time x lower bar, he quits. If he finds out the task is difficult, he works exactly the additional effort required and completes the task. Okay? However, full delayed disclosure might be more incentive than necessary to get the agent to start working. Okay? The value of that information might be larger than the cost to the agent of working until x lower bar. Okay? In that case, the principal can do better than full delayed disclosure, and he can effectively transfer the rent that the agent was getting from this information back to himself by muddying the waters, by using partial disclosure at time x lower bar. Okay? In particular, at time x lower bar, instead of telling the agent the task is easy or the task is hard, he tells the agent either the task is easy or the task is difficult with probability p. Okay? And he chooses that p to be high enough that the agent is willing to keep working until x upper bar, okay? But no higher than that, okay? And by doing so, the principal gets the agent to work until x upper bar even when the task is easy with some probability, okay? The meaning of the message, the task is difficult with probability p, is I'm sending you this message with some probability conditional on state x lower bar and some probability conditional on state x upper bar. And based on those probabilities, you infer that the conditional probability that the task is difficult, x upper bar, is p. And if p is high enough to get the agent to work, that means he works until x upper bar with some probability even when the task is easy. And this is wasted effort on the part of the agent, but it's valuable output for the principal. And this is a way of transferring surplus from the agent to the principal. And the optimal mechanism will transfer the most surplus possible so that the agent at time 0 gets exactly 0 payoff. Okay, so that he's exactly indifferent between quitting now and continuing on with this scheme. Okay, and that's the optimal mechanism when full delayed disclosure is enough to get the agent to start working. It might be that the agent started out so pessimistic that full delayed disclosure wasn't even enough to get the agent to start working, and then the mechanism is a little bit more complicated. It uses this incentive reversals. The principal starts by sending a message that says either just quit now because the task is difficult, or start working because the task is easy with probability p. And p is chosen just enough to get the agent to start working. And then later on, when he gets to x lower bar, this delayed disclosure happens again, and the agent possibly continues working until x upper bar. And that's the moving the goalpost policy. Okay? In either of these cases, the principal creates value in the relationship through his disclosures. Information is valuable, but extracts all of that valuable information by the value of that information by choosing the disclosure to be just noisy enough to keep the agent at the agent's participation constraint. Okay? So in this mechanism, the principal makes use of the fact that the agent starts out with some uncertainty. Okay? And information disclosure is useful precisely because the agent starts out with that uncertainty. Okay? The principal does the best he can given the agent's ex-ante uncertainty, but the question is, does the principal benefit from the uncertainty? So I want to think about now a principal who can not only use this policy of information disclosure, but can also choose how difficult the task has to be, okay? And can make that certain or uncertain, okay? So he can design not only information disclosure policy, but also the random variable x, okay? And we're going to characterize the optimal distribution of task difficulty. Again, I want to start by making the point that the principal benefits from the uncertainty of the agent by showing you that the principal prefers a random threshold to a deterministic one. Okay? So let's think about designing the random variable x, and let's start with a degenerate random variable where there's a certain task difficulty, okay? And ask what would be the optimal difficulty. Well, the most the principal could get the agent to work, if the agent knew for sure what the threshold was this maximal individually rational effort tau bar. Okay? Let's compare that now to a random mechanism. Okay? And I'm going to design the random mechanism in a particular way. So I want to choose this duration tau tilde as follows. Tau tilde is some duration such that working that much longer, getting the reward that much later, and incurring the associated effort is at least as good as stopping right now and getting the reward with probability 1/2. Okay? So imagine the agent has worked some duration, and then this tau tilde is an additional duration such that he would be willing to do that if the alternative was quit now and get the reward with probability 1/2. And now I want to define a random threshold, which is just a mean preserving spread around this maximal individually rational threshold, okay, where the spread is half of this duration. Okay? And now you see the role of the probability 1/2 in the construction of tau tilde. Imagine that the agent has worked this long, x lower bar, And he starts with a prior belief that these two were equally likely. Okay? And now he has to decide whether to continue working. Okay? If he quits now, he'll get the reward with probability of half. The incremental effort required is tau tilde, and he will get the reward with for sure after that, and he prefers to do that. Okay? So this is an incremental effort which is individually rational for the agent. Okay? However, if the agent started with the prior belief that these two thresholds were equally likely, he would never start working in the first place. Okay? The reason is, because that increment is individually rational, the agent knows that if he ever gets to x lower bar, he'll continue on to x upper bar. And x upper bar is not individually rational. It's more than tau upper bar. So knowing at the beginning that the agent would work all the way until x upper bar, and knowing that that's worse than quitting right away, the agent would quit right away. Okay? So this random mechanism without some intervention by the principal in the form of information disclosure is certainly not going to improve upon the deterministic threshold. Okay? But we know from this binary example that I just went through that there's a way for the principal to actually get the agent to work longer than tau upper bar. Okay? Indeed, full delayed disclosure would do the job. Okay? So if the agent started with a prior of 50-50 on x lower bar and x upper bar, and the principal told the agent, you'll find out at time x lower bar whether the task is easy or difficult, then the agent can know from that policy that he'll complete the task with probability 1. The easy task is individually rational, and given that he's doing that, the incremental effort is worth it. Okay? So the principal can get the agent to complete the task with probability 1, even the non-individually rational difficult task. And now we want to ask, what is the expected effort that the principal gets out of the agent from this random policy? Okay, with probability half, it's less than tau upper bar. With probability half, it's more than tau upper bar. Okay? The first thing I want to show is that the agent's expected payoff from full delayed disclosure is larger than his payoff under the deterministic threshold tau upper bar. Okay? And here's the main idea that I'm going to be talking about going forward. Okay, so here's the agent's payoff from working until some threshold x. Okay? And let's just rewrite it like this. And when you rewrite it like this and you think about lotteries over x, okay, these are like random times at which the agent is going to earn a reward r plus c. Okay, if you look at this way of writing the payoff, it's as if the agent pays some upfront cost c, and then at some point in time, he's going to get r, and he's going to get c back. Okay, so at some point in time, he's going to earn a reward, and lotteries over the threshold are like lotteries over the time he earns that reward. And he's an exponential discounter, so it's as if he's got an expected utility index that's exponential utility. And in fact, the agent is risk-loving with respect to lotteries over that reward. Okay, because that's a convex index. Okay? And so we've just taken a mean preserving spread of tau upper bar, and therefore the agent prefers this mean preserving spread to tau upper bar. So the principal has made the agent strictly better off by the random threshold. Okay, of course, for the same reason, okay, and so here's, a calculation of that. The expected effort costs are smaller, the expected reward value is larger. But for the same reason, the principal is worse off. Okay, so the principal, we can write his payoff in a similar way, and he's getting a mean preserving spread of tau upper bar. He's risk averse because the lottery over the threshold is like a lottery over the time when he gets a penalty. He loses the agent. The agent stops working for him. Okay? And so the principal is risk averse, and so the principal is worse off compared to tau upper bar. Okay? And so in order for the principal to be better off, something more has to happen. Okay? And the something more is going to be partial disclosure. Okay? So I'm going to use this diagram to show how the principal improves. So think of point A as the optimal deterministic threshold tau upper bar, and point B as full delayed disclosure. And notice, and the agent's payoff is on the horizontal axis, and the principal's payoff is on the vertical axis. The agent's payoff has increased. The principal's payoff has gone down in the movement from point A to point B. I'm going to show you now how adding partial delayed disclosure transfers surplus from the agent to the principal, as we saw before, but in a way that's favorable to the principal, so that the end result is that the principal is better off. Okay? So partial delayed disclosure is going to work exactly the same way. Instead of telling the agent at x lower bar exactly the difficulty of the task, he's going to say the task is difficult with a probability p. And we're going to think about p ranging from 0 to 1. So we're going to think about the full range from full delayed disclosure to no disclosure at all. Okay? So p from 0 to a half. Okay? So this delayed disclosure is a transfer of surplus from the agent to the principal because it makes the agent work longer in state x upper bar, okay, and increases the probability that he does that. And that lowers the agent's payoff and raises the principal's payoff in a linear way. Okay, so it's a linear transfer of surplus from the agent to the principal. And so it's going to trace out some line here. Okay? And it ranges from full disclosure, which is point B, to no disclosure at all. And we know that no disclosure at all would give the agent a negative surplus. No disclosure at all was like what I said at the very beginning. Absent any intervention from the principal, this random threshold is worse than the deterministic threshold, which gave the agent 0. Okay? So we can move the agent's payoff from the point at B all the way back to 0. And I want to show you that along the way, we're going to be raising the principal's payoff above where he started at point A. Now, a simple intuition is to start by thinking about the case where the principal has linear utility, so no discounting at all. That's like risk neutrality with respect to this random threshold. And that would mean that this line, the red line, is actually flat. Okay? And so the principal is not made any worse off by the lottery. And then the transfer will certainly transfer surplus from the agent to the principal and eventually give the principal a higher payoff. What I'm going to show you is that's true for any discount factor of the principal, any discount rate of the principal, no smaller than the agent's. Okay, so as I said before, exponential discounting is like risk aversion or risk affinity. In fact, it's constant absolute risk affinity or aversion. Okay, and the movement to point B is about risk tolerance. Okay, so we added randomness to the threshold. And that benefited the agent and harmed the principal because of their risk preferences. The movement to point C is about just marginal value of effort. Okay? So think of the movement to point B as like about the second derivative of the utility function, and the movement from point B to point C is about the first derivative of the utility function. Okay? Exponential discounting is constant absolute risk aversion, which is the ratio of those two. Okay? And so the comparison of these slopes will boil down to the comparison of their coefficient of absolute risk aversion. That's the idea. So let's refer to the slope from B to C as the change in the principal's value over the change in the agent's value, 2 for the second step in this modification. And the slope of the first line, the red line, as the change in the principal's value over the change in the agent's value. And what we're doing is we're comparing the slope of those two lines, and I want to show you that this line is steeper. Okay? So that's equivalent to comparing these ratios. This is the change in the principal's payoff from adding the risk to the change in the principal's payoff from extracting surplus. That's the ratio of the second derivative to the first derivative. And likewise for the agent. So these are just the coefficient of risk tolerance for the two parties. And because the principal is more patient than the agent, the principal's coefficient of risk aversion is smaller, and the principal's tolerance to risk, the principal is more tolerant to risk than the agent, and the net effect is that this line has a steeper slope than this one. So that the principal, when we move all the way to point C, the agent has got a negative utility. We're going to move just to the point where the agent's utility is 0, and in the end, the principal's payoff will be higher. Okay, so a mean preserving spread in the threshold, coupled with information disclosure, allows the principal to improve on the optimal deterministic threshold, and so the principal benefits from uncertainty. Okay? And in the remaining time, I want to ask the following question. Okay, so given that the principal wants a random threshold, okay, what is the optimal threshold? What is the optimal distribution of thresholds? So the basic idea behind this optimization problem, the principal is going to choose the distribution F, and then he's going to choose an information disclosure policy to induce a random quitting time for the agent in order to maximize the principal's, that tau should not be there. In order to maximize the principal's discounted accumulated effort, is what was going on in that example. So what's going on in that example is that the two parties have different risk preferences. The agent likes risk, the principal doesn't like risk. The principal likes effort, the agent doesn't like effort. This acts as a two-dimensional exchange between the principal and the agent, which pushes them toward more and more risk. Okay? But what constrains the principal in the design of this policy is that it has to be implementable for the agent. It has to be incentive compatible for the agent to follow along when the principal tells the agent to keep working. In particular, the different risk tolerances tend to push the principal to offering a distribution with high probability on very easy tasks and high probability on very difficult tasks, kind of leveraging the same idea from that binary example. But the principal can't go too far in doing this, because if the gap between these two task difficulties is large, then the agent would never be willing to continue once he gets past the easy task. Okay? So this optimization problem is going to balance the efficiency gains from adding uncertainty with the incentive constraint of the agent to keep going. Okay? So I'm going to just walk you through the steps in the design of the optimal F. Okay, so first of all, we can restrict attention to policies in which the agent completes the task with probability 1. Okay? The reason is the following. Suppose the principal chooses an F and uses a disclosure policy that gets the agent to quit at some random time. Okay? And suppose that with some probability the agent is working longer than necessary. So there's some realization of the task difficulty under which the agent is not stopping right at that point, but actually working a little bit longer. Okay? Now consider a new distribution where the principal just increases the difficulty of the task to exactly how long the agent is working. Okay? This doesn't change the agent's payoff at all, because of course the agent only earns his reward when he quits. The fact that the task was easier than that didn't matter to the agent. Okay? However, it only weakens incentives, because the fact that the task might have been completed already makes the agent reluctant to keep working. By now making the task only completed when the agent quits, the principal takes up any slack in the agent's incentives, and if the original policy was implementable, the new policy is implementable as well. Okay? So we can restrict attention to policies in which the agent quits exactly when the task is complete and never works longer than that. And along the way, the principal uses minimal information disclosure. That is, the principal tells the agent nothing other than you have completed the task or you have not yet completed the task. Okay? So the principal designs this random threshold F. The agent starts working. Once he completes the task, the principal tells him, and up until that point, the principal tells him nothing. Okay? Any schedule that's implementable is implementable by such a policy. Now, implementability means that the agent always has a non-negative continuation value. Okay, he can always quit. Okay, and get 0. Okay, and so if the principal wants the agent to keep working, it has to be that the continuation value from continuing to work is at least that. This is an expression for the continuation value. It's just the expected value of the additional effort cost and reward value conditional on the task not yet having completed. So at time t, the agent asks himself, is it worth it for me to continue? And the answer is yes, if this conditional expected value is greater than or equal to 0. And a policy is implementable if and only if that's greater than or equal to 0 at every time. Okay? First step in the construction is that an optimal distribution cannot have an atom. And this is basically the idea behind the deterministic threshold that we ruled out before. Okay, that was an atom at tau upper bar, and the principle can improve by splitting that atom and creating a mean preserving spread. Okay, that's true for any distribution that has an atom. Okay, so we can restrict attention to atomless distributions. Now, the fact that we did this splitting and we split it into atoms suggests that we could further split those into atoms, and it seems like this would just lead to endless atom splitting, and it raises the question of whether this leads to anything, indeed whether an optimal schedule actually exists. Okay, and in fact it does. The tricky thing is that the incentive constraints here are defined by this conditional expectation. And conditional expectations don't behave well with respect to limits of distributions. Okay, and if we wanted to use the typical means for showing that an optimum exists, namely the feasible set is compact and the value function is continuous, well, we'd run into an issue with the compactness, because if we think about sequences of distributions which are implementable such that this is non-negative at every point along the sequence, it might fail to be non-negative at the limit. Okay, because there might be a mass point that falls out of this boundary. Okay? Nevertheless, that can be taken care of. So it's still the case that this feasible set is compact, and the principal's value function is continuous, and so an optimal distribution exists. Indeed, an optimal distribution, therefore, must have a constant continuation value equal to 0 at every point. Okay? And here's why. If there was a positive continuation value at some point, okay, if the distribution gave the agent a positive continuation value at some point, because the distribution has no atoms, the continuation value is continuous. Okay? The continuation value is the probability of completing the task in the near future. And since it has no atoms, that's a continuous value. So it means we can find a whole interval where the continuation value is continuous. And then we're going to do this mass splitting trick again. We're going to take all the mass in that interval, and we're going to move it to the endpoints. Okay? This is going to raise the agent's value at time 0. That was our argument before. And then we can extract some surplus to raise the principal's value. And the only remaining thing to check is that we haven't destroyed the agent's incentives in the intervening period. We removed mass from an interval, moved it to the endpoints, and this might lower the agent's continuation value in that intervening period and make it no longer implementable. But if we started at a point where the continuation value was positive over that interval, then a little bit of this kind of manipulation isn't going to break that. Okay? And so it can't be that we have a positive continuation value. And so it must be 0 at every point. And if the continuation value is 0 at every point, it means the distribution has a constant hazard rate. Okay, the hazard rate is the rate at which this reward arrives. And if the continuation value is constant, it means that that reward must be arriving at a constant rate. There's only one class of distributions that has a constant hazard rate, and that's an exponential distribution. An exponential distribution gives the agent a constant continuation value given by this expression. We know that that has to equal 0 at an optimum, and so we can choose the particular value of the parameter of the exponential distribution, lambda, to make this equal to 0. And we find that the optimal distribution for the principal is an exponential distribution. And this goes back to my story of parenting. Okay? So the parent says to the child, I know you're only willing to work this long, but I actually want to get you to work longer. Okay? Start working, and at a constant rate, I'm going to tell you whether you're done, and you're going to earn the pride of having completed the task, or otherwise I'm going to have you keep on working. And the optimal distribution has the child working arbitrarily long, okay? Indeed, strictly longer on average than he would work if the parent told the child at the beginning how difficult this was going to be. And it's like breaking a difficult task up into little pieces. It's like baby steps. Okay? The principle leverages the fact that sunk costs are sunk, and the agent is only deciding whether to work just a little bit longer, and the random threshold allows the principal to reuse the incentive of this reward to always get the agent to work just a little bit longer, and indeed, with an exponential distribution, in principle, arbitrarily long. And my time is up, so I will stop now.
I know that the other talk actually started even later than ours, so I think we can take one or two questions from the floor. Any?
Yeah. Think about the possibility that we might ask the child to stop a while, and then they restart after some time, right? So can you eliminate this possibility of being optimal mechanism?
Sorry, could you just
You
say?
ask the child to start at a particular time point, wait for a while, then they restart. Allow this kind of mechanism. Whether you can eliminate the
So mechanisms like this are implementable. So certainly you can implement mechanisms with gaps,
right,
and atoms. But if the principal's goal is just to maximize expected effort, that's never optimal. It's always better to spread the mass out over that gap.
Right. So basically, you can eliminate the optimality of this.
Yes.
Gap, right? Thanks.
Yeah, given the time constraint, we have to stop here. Let's thank Professor Ely for a wonderful talk.